On the offensive, what President Donald Trump is saying about the fight against the coronavirus pandemic and continued reaction to the selection of Kamala Harris as the Democratic vice presidential candidate. Trip to Europe. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in Slovenia and meets a Catholic cardinal. Pilgrim's Progress, an update on holy sites like Assisi and how they're doing with fewer tourists due to COVID-19. And Pledge of Support. Germany's top diplomat makes a trip to Beirut following the deadly explosion last week. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, August 13th, 2020. Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Donald Trump announces a history-making agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. Both countries agreed to establish full diplomatic ties. President Trump broke the news this morning on Twitter and then called in reporters. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, the White House mediated the deal between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, revealing it today, and the goal is to bring peace among the different faiths.
Everybody said this would be impossible.
From the Oval Office, President Donald Trump announcing a major diplomatic deal.
After 49 years, Israel and the United Arab Emirates will fully normalize their diplomatic relations.
The president called it a truly historic moment.
This deal is a significant step towards building a more peaceful, secure, and prosperous Middle East.
It's being called the Abraham Accord.
Abraham, as many of you know, was the father of all three great faiths.
Senior advisor to the president, Jared Kushner, says the accord advances the region and the world.
I would like to say to the people of the region, Muslims, Jews, Christians, that this does give hope, that the problems of the past do not condemn you to a future with conflict.
Meanwhile, the U.S. economy. Word today, layoffs appear to be slowing. Last week, under 1 million people applied for unemployment. Still high, but not as bad as it's been. But for people hoping for another aid bill soon, White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow told EWTN News Nightly,
I don't want to bet on anything. I can just tell you right now, it's a stalemate.
And students getting ready for a brand new, albeit very different school year. President Trump told me last night,
Online is not the same as being in the classroom, and that's been proven. It's been proven loud and clear.
Now back to the Abraham Accord. Israel will halt annexation plans, and tonight Democrat Joe Biden is praising Israel for doing that. Tracy?
Okay, thank you so much, Owen. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. While Americans counting on emergency coronavirus aid from Washington may have to wait until the fall, hopes for a swift compromise are dwindling as the White House and congressional leaders remain far apart on details. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, Tracy, Republicans and Democrats, they're not even in the same zip code, much less the same state when it comes to COVID virus relief bill. Now, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi did hold a presser today, and it's been days, she says, that she's had a face-to-face meeting with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. I did press her and asked her, is Treasury Secretary Mnuchin correct when he criticized Democrats for not being willing to come to the table? He also said Democrats have no interest in negotiating. Your reaction?
No, you know what? I think something was wrong with his statement. We said $2 trillion, and then we can sit down at the table. Then he said, that's not what she said. She said $2 trillion or we can't sit down at the table. Didn't you think that that was strange?
But the key may be in this phrase from Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin's statement, which specified, quote, she made clear that she was unwilling to meet to continue negotiations unless we agree in advance to her proposal, costing at least $2 trillion. I asked the Speaker, when's your next conversation with him?
I don't know. When they're going to ready, when they come in with $2 trillion.
And defending Democrats call for money for the U.S. Postal Service to process mail-in ballots. The Speaker criticized President Trump's concerns.
Now, the president is making a big distinction between nothing wrong with absentee ballots. I just don't like vote by mail. So I said to my folks, don't call it vote by mail anymore. Just call it absentee ballot. They're exactly the same thing.
On voting by mail, Illinois Congressman Rodney Davis warns.
I'm glad that the Illinois State Legislature decided to mail applications for mail-in ballots, applications for absentee ballots, rather than mailing live ballots to registered voters like some other states do. That is a process when you mail live ballots that is ripe for fraud.
And on the Senate floor, the GOP leader calls for a deal.
Republicans have been at the table for weeks. We just need seriousness on the other side.
Right now, lawmakers are on call. They will be given 24-hour notice to leave their state and come back to Washington, D.C. and vote. Meanwhile, schools hoping for federal dollars to deal with this COVID virus relief, well, they're just going to have to wait, along with Americans across the country who are dealing with this pandemic. Tracy?
Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill tonight. Thank you so much, Eric. The U.S. Secretary of State continues his tour of Europe. Mike Pompeo signed a 5G agreement with leaders in Slovenia today and says the deal on high-speed wireless networks bans Chinese companies like Huawei.
The tide is turning against the Chinese Communist Party and its efforts to restrict freedom for all of us.
He signed a joint declaration on 5G clean network security with Slovenia's foreign minister. It only allows trusted companies to develop wireless networks. Secretary Pompeo is on the second stop of his four-nation tour of Eastern and Central Europe. Yesterday, he visited the Catholic Cathedral in the capital of the Czech Republic. Pompeo, who was raised a Catholic, tweeted, quote, deeply honored to meet Cardinal Duca, a hero of religious freedom, at Prague's magnificent St. Vitus Cathedral. I am truly inspired by his story of courage despite being imprisoned and persecuted for his Catholic faith under the communist regime. The Pentagon says Iran seized an oil tanker in the Persian Gulf yesterday and released it hours later. The U.S. military published black and white video that appears to show Iranian special forces dropping from a helicopter on the tanker. The ship never sent a distress signal, and Iran is not saying anything. The ship's last location today was off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. Israel tested an advanced missile defense system and successfully stopped an incoming long-range ballistic missile.
The target missile was launched toward the State of Israel from the Mediterranean Sea. The system radar, the Green Pine, acquired the target and tracked on it till the moment that interceptor was launched toward the target and intercepted on the right moment as expected.
The overnight test was conducted jointly with the U.S. Missile Defense Agency. The Arrow 2 is part of a multi-layered system to defend Israel against short and mid-range rockets coming in from Gaza, Lebanon, or Iran. The parliament in Lebanon is extending a state of emergency. It gives the military extra powers to enforce curfews and stop public protests. Parliament met for the first time since last week's explosion. The state of emergency is different from another one that was extended by the temporary health minister today. Germany's top diplomat is in Beirut meeting with Lebanon's Maronite Christian president, Michel Aoun. Heiko Maas is promising to help rebuild the devastated city and pledged another 20 million euros in aid. There are not a lot of tourists at pilgrimage sites this summer because of the coronavirus pandemic, including Medjugorje. Tens of thousands of people usually attend the Feast of the Assumption of Mary into Heaven in the small town in southern Bosnia. It is set for this Saturday, but this year only about 1,000 people made the journey. Millions typically visit the shrine in Medjugorje. Every year it became a popular destination after the Blessed Virgin appeared to 6 children starting in 1981. The coronavirus pandemic is also having a devastating effect on Catholic pilgrimage to Italy. In towns like Assisi, which are so important to the faithful, there has been a 90% drop in international visitors. Public celebrations on important feast days like the Assumption will go ahead, but few foreign pilgrims are expected to take part. Alan Holdren, the EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief, has been following this story, and he joins us now. Alan, welcome back. So can you give us a breakdown of the latest international tourism figures in Italy and also how they compare with figures prior to the outbreak of the coronavirus?
Yeah, Tracy, so the National Tourism Agency released figures that said that compared to last year, the first half of this year, international traffic into airports in Italy was down by 81%. If you imagine that the first 2 months there was freedom to move, and then for about 4 months following that, there was absolutely none. It was on lockdown. That tells the story of the numbers. There's also, if you look at the number of bookings from the U.S. alone, this month we're down 90+%. So a lot of people aren't able to come here because of restrictions on international travel into Europe. And if you take a look at the numbers, and I think this is optimistic, Tracy, they're saying that they should have just a 55% decrease in the total numbers of international traffic into Italy this year compared to last year. And that would be a total loss of 35 million visitors this year. I think that's hoping that the second half of the year will go a lot better than the first.
Alan, how has the decline in international pilgrims to Italy affected the local economy of places like Assisi and Rome?
Yeah, well, we see it around us here in the neighborhood around St. Peter's Basilica. There are a lot of shops that are still shuttered, asking for government help in order to reopen. There is a recovery fund that's been financed by the European Union that's yet to get really started. It's in Assisi, it was the same sort of thing. A lot of places that are just biding their time, waiting for better times. A lot of Italians that are taking to the streets, though, and that's actually the only language I heard in the streets of Assisi.
I know that you've recently visited the pilgrim site, which claims to have the veil of Veronica used to wipe Jesus' face during his passion. What was the atmosphere like there at the shrine of the Holy Face of Manopella?
Well, I'll tell you what, Tracy, Manopella is quite a small town anyway, but for these major celebrations like the Transfiguration, it's their big feast of the year. So people who know Manopella, or maybe some people for the first time, will come to that feast in particular every year. This year it was mainly a local celebration. There were probably 90, more than that % of the people were local residents who were used to having a fair and stands and fireworks all around throughout the evening of the August the 6th feast. We did have fireworks, but besides that, there wasn't a whole lot of other festivities, and I could count on one hand the number of international pilgrims that were there.
Wow. Well, as far as anti-COVID measures, can you talk about the measures that are in place to protect international and local visitors still wanting to go to those pilgrimage sites?
Yeah, so Tracy, it's the same as going to churches here in Italy anywhere. We've got the social distancing measures. You've got to wash your hands with the hand sanitizer when you go in. They've got it there for when you go out as well. You've got to wear the mask indoors. Here, there hasn't been a lot of pushback on that. So you just see people with masks washing their hands, keeping their distances, and you see a lot of just fewer numbers, fewer people. People are still a little bit concerned to go to bigger celebrations, and that's normal.
Well, Alan, thank you so much for your time. We always appreciate it. Alan Holdren, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Thanks again, Alan.
Thank you, Tracy.
Coming up, a closer look at a busy week in the 2020 election. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden raised $26 million in the 24 hours after naming California Senator Kamala Harris as his running mate. According to Biden's campaign, that is more than double its previous one-day record. Biden and Harris made their first appearance together as running mates yesterday in Delaware. Harris is the first woman of color on a major party's presidential ticket. Joining me now on Skype to talk more about the 2020 presidential race is Susan Crabtree, White House and national political correspondent for Real Clear Politics. Susan, welcome back. Always good to have you on.
Thanks so much. Great to be with you, Tracy.
So, Susan, what's your take on the nomination of Senator Kamala Harris as the Dems VP nominee? And also, what do you think about yesterday's campaign event? Do you think it helped to solidify her partnership with Joe Biden, at least in the eyes of voters?
Well, certainly yesterday, she really shone brightly. I thought that the two of them had some chemistry that we didn't know about before because of all of the controversy over her attacks on him, basically calling him a racist over the busing issue back when she was a little girl. And so, but bygones are bygones, it seems. And the two of them talked about their relationship with Beau Biden. She was Attorney General in California, and he was Attorney General in Delaware. And what kind of, they forged a bond there. And she really talked about how she admired the relationship that he talked about with his father. And there was some, there was some little bit of a teary moments there. And I thought that showed some chemistry with Joe Biden that we didn't know she had. And that the two of them together, they had some energy there that we haven't seen from his campaign in a long time.
Yeah, well, the coronavirus obviously prevented the usual way in which the rollouts typically happen. As you know, there were no big crowds of supporters in attendance yesterday, but both Biden and Harris really did seize on President Trump's handling of the health crisis to go on the attack. Can you talk about that?
Well, yes, she was more of the attack dog than he was. Her speech was about 3 times as long, which is very rare for a vice presidential candidate with the presidential candidate standing right there. A little bit of concern that she is outshining him a bit and did yesterday. But when she did, she's very effective in going on the attack. We learned about this during the Democratic primary when she attacked Joe Biden. But also, she now is not going to sort of mince her words when it comes to, that's a strength of hers, and she's going to bring that to the Trump campaign as well. And when they have a new debate in October, they have a debate coming up with Vice President Mike Pence, and he said he's ready for it. So, yeah, I mean, I do think that she was really harsh on the Trump administration when it came to blaming them for the economy and the jobs, when there's a lot of tension over there, and we're seeing the economic numbers, the labor numbers even today come back in a what the Trump campaign likes to talk about, a V-shaped curve. So, you know, I don't know if that was the best sell for her to blame Trump on the economy when, you know, anybody who would be running these and recommending lockdowns across the country, he's actually been more aggressive in pushing for the lockdowns to be lifted. I'm sure that's the one moment in the speech that gave me pause, but otherwise, very powerful language from Kamala Harris and Joe Biden signing back with some emotional moments there.
Well, Susan, thank you so much for coming on. We always appreciate your analysis. Susan Crabtree, White House and national political correspondent for Real Clear Politics. Thanks again, Susan.
Absolutely, Tracy. Thanks for having me.
Officials in the state of Georgia are appealing a ruling last month that permanently blocked a pro-life measure from taking effect. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp signed a bill that would ban abortion on a baby's heartbeat when it is detected. A federal judge blocked the law, saying it violates the Constitution. And in Nebraska, lawmakers have approved a ban on dilation and evacuation abortions. The measure was passed by a 33-8 margin. It now heads to Governor Pete Ricketts' desk. The Republican has signaled his support for the proposal. Pro-lifers in Nebraska are hailing the decision. And tonight on EWTN's Pro-Life Weekly, an organization called Pregnancy and Life Assistance Network is working on plans for if Roe v. Wade, the landmark Supreme Court case mandating legal abortion nationwide, is one day overturned.
Well, as a former nurse who comforted an abortion survivor, I've witnessed firsthand the vital importance of the pro-life Americans stepping up to protect both unborn babies and babies who've been born, as well as their moms.
To hear more of Catherine Hadrow's interview, turn into Pro-Life Weekly, airing tonight at 10 p.m. And for other times and listings, visit our website, EWTN.com. Up next, we'll discuss the implementation of President Donald Trump's executive order on religious freedom. A former employee has been charged with stealing more than $450,000 from the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. The former assistant superintendent of Catholic schools is accused of embezzling the money over an 8-year period. The Washington Post reports the employee has pleaded not guilty. For more on this story, including how the Archdiocese of Washington is responding, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Well, tonight we take a closer look at President Trump's executive order on advancing international religious freedom and its importance to U.S. diplomatic efforts. Issued in June, the order states in part, religious freedom for all people worldwide is a foreign policy priority of the United States, and the United States will respect and vigorously promote this freedom. Joining me now on Skype to talk more about the role that this executive order will play going forward is Dr. Kent Hill, Senior Fellow for Eurasia, Middle East, and Islam at the Religious Freedom Institute. Dr. Hill, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being with us.
Glad to be here.
So let's talk about the connection between religious freedom and national security.
You know, there's a kind of a common misunderstanding that religious freedom is a kind of niche issue that's for, it's of value to the religious minorities in question, but doesn't really have anything to do with national, international security. But it couldn't be further from the truth. The fact is that when religious freedom exists, all sorts of other societal goods follow, including peace and stability. So if you can get a society to have a religious freedom, they will invariably be less of a threat, not only to their own citizens, but to citizens of other countries.
Well, Dr. Hill, as you know, the executive order provides new resources for programs to advance religious freedom. I know you spoke today with the acting administrator of USAID. What did he have to say, and what do you expect to see accomplished?
Yes, acting administrator Barsa was very excited about the opportunity to play a major role in helping to roll out this important executive order that came out a few weeks ago. $50 million are going to be expended to this, so it's not just words. But in terms of what we talked about in terms of what will come out of it, one of the things that will come out of it is training for USG personnel on why religious freedom matters and how to advance it. It's the simple sort of thing of explaining why religious freedom matters, about the religious freedom dynamic in various countries, how to promote it, how to program for it, and they've got time limits on when they must come up with a game plan to make it happen. They're thrilled about this and want to see it happen. And Samal Norquist, who's the point person for USAID on religious freedom, was on the call as well on the webinar, and she was very specific about things they want to do and the difference it's going to make.
Well, this order also requires a strategic implementation plan to be presented within 180 days. That's basically late November following the presidential election. What impact might that have, do you think, on the promotion of religious freedom?
Well, it's sad to say, but in recent months and years, the state of religious freedom around the world has declined. So anything that can retard that, can stop it, can begin to reduce it, reverse it, will be of value. I mean, it's hard to do that at a time when, if anything, things are getting much worse. If you think about the explosion in Lebanon, and one of the most stable and religiously free countries in the Middle East, it's very disconcerting. This is one of the few places that Shia and Sunni and Christians and Druze and others had managed to get along relatively well. But what we know from the past, what we know after the fall of Saddam Hussein, is that whenever there's chaos, sectarian violence, one of the necessary and always predictable consequences is the demise of religious freedom and the harm to religious minorities. So that's why Administrator Barsa had gone to Lebanon just within the last few days to meet with religious leaders, in part to see what they can do to help bring stability in this chaotic situation right now.
Well, Dr. Hill, thank you so much for your time. Dr. Kent Hill, Senior Fellow for Eurasia, Middle East, and Islam at the Religious Freedom Institute. Thank you again for your insights.
Good to be with you.
And finally tonight, it is a special time for Portuguese who are returning to Fatima this week. The international pilgrimage at Fatima started yesterday. Portuguese who left the country are returning to the shrine to pray to the Virgin Mary. They are celebrating the national pilgrimage of migrants and refugees and are offering wheat. It's to be used to make hosts at the shrine for the upcoming year. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.